we've been trained to value our own role, but sadly, when we communicate it to people, it's perceived as self-interest. And that bums me out. So I need you to tell the story, Prue. You tell them. You tell them that we're good guys.
So I heard, a podcast for cattle vets, students and anyone interested in the dairy and beef industries. It's been brought to you by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. I'm agricultural journalist, Prue Adams. You're going to love this next conversation with Enoch Bergman. It's a rollicking wild ride as he takes us from his tiny hometown in Colorado, population 12, to Esperance in Western Australia. There is so much more to Enoch than that journey though. A leader in BVD virus, he established Australia's first commercial PI diagnosis laboratory. And he's even become something of a YouTube sensation. Hold on to your hat as I chat with Enoch the cow vet.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy to you too. So you have got a fascinating story.
It's interesting.
From small town, like really small town, to...
Yep.
Yeah,
wild horse.
Tell me about it.
Probably should have called it dirty chicken, really. Just a small town out in the middle of nowhere. Most of the people Norwegian background, so my last name's means mountain man in Norwegian, Bergman. Most of the people settled out there in the early 1900s. And then the farms rationalized, so they got much larger. Some people moved into town and started businesses, but a real sense of community, which I guess is kind of why I went to vet school. Wanted to help my friends and family be more profitable without sacrificing welfare outcomes. And I guess I thought I'd come over here for a bit and got stuck, and I've got new friends and family.
What brought you to Australia?
Well, I grew up about, like I say, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. You know, our parents raised us to be pretty independent. So once we left home, they told us we could come home anytime, but not for more than 3 days. And so I went off to uni, and that was quite a culture shock to an extent, but we were kind of raised to figure things out and to explore options. And growing up, we'd go get, from garage sales and stuff, we'd buy National Geographics, and I just had a real fascination with Australia. And then Crocodile Dundee, he showed us what it's really like. And then the old Crocodile Hunter after that. And then occasionally Aussies would come out and work out in eastern Colorado. And they were always the coolest guys. Of
course they were.
And then I worked for the PBR for a bit, and some of the bullfighters and some of the bronc riders and things that also helped set up rodeos and things. They were illegally operating Australians and Kiwis. And they're like, mate, you should go over to Australia. You'd love it. So I thought I'd come for a year, Prue. And that was back in 2003. And
where did you come to? And what kept you here?
I had a professor in uni at Colorado State University, so I'd finished vet school, and I'd hung my own shingle after I graduated, doing mostly feedlot work and sale yard work, and I had a custom hay-in business I was running as well, and I had an Australian professor, and a friend of mine had mentioned to me that if you passed the NAVLE, you could work in Australia, just walk right in. I was like, yo, no way, that's wild. So I went and spoke to Simon Turner, who's pretty famous equine surgeon and anatomist, and his brother's a vet over here, famous ophthalmologist. And Simon sent my resume to a guy named Jeff Withers, who's pretty well known in the industry as a vet that worked a lot with industry, and he passed it on to Ann Cover, who was the executive of the ACV. She flicked my resume out, and I had 3 job offers from Australia. One was working with, you interviewed Melissa a little bit ago, her husband Matt George, working with their company under a guy named Hollis Klett doing feedlot nutrition. And they said, if you come across, we need a 5-year commitment, we'll teach you to fly. And that sounded awesome. But I just wanted to come for a year, Prue. So there was a job offer in Esperance, Western Australia. And to me, Australia's a dot on a map. Great young fella, David Swan and his wife, Nicole Swan, married couple. And they needed a 3rd vet because their associate vet was leaving. And they hired me over the phone and hopped on a plane, and after several stops, landed in Perth and got on a bus and went down to Esperance, and I was preg testing cows 2 days later.
Wow.
It was great.
What a great ride.
Have you been to Esperance?
I haven't been to Esperance, no.
Right. Now you're saving the best for last, Prue. Oh, it's gorgeous. As a South Australian girl, you see some beautiful beaches. But we've got fantastic beaches there too. And most of our farmers, the majority of them, came from South Australia. Because a lot of the West Australian farmers, when they got into that kind of really tough country where it was low rainfall and poor soil type, they kind of gave up on going further. The South Australians, on the other hand, came from the other side across the Nullarbor looking for opportunities. And that pretty much describes Esperance, these farmers that they took a chance, they just love innovation. And I guess I'm kind of wired similarly. And so it's kind of hand in glove, and they let me come up with some crazy ideas and they give it a crack. And sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. And it's just been a fantastic place to grow up and raise kids and be a vet.
So that's what happened, is that you met someone here, clearly,
I decided
and you've got
to
a
stay
family
before
here?
then. Yeah, Prue. A lot of people say, "Oh, I stayed because of Jamie." And geez, a good reason to stay. Trust me. But after a year, David and Nicole, because I only wanted to come for a year, I was going to pick up a cool accent. I was still working on that. Still am.
You've got a few, like, your mate. You can do mate.
Australia. Yep. And so after a year, they said, "Geez, we're having a great time with you." I'd preg tested about 35,000 cows and everything else, cats and dogs and horses. And they said, "We'd love you to stay a bit longer." And I said, well, I never intended to work for someone because I didn't grow up that way. Dad always made us figure out a way if we wanted to do something, we had to figure out how to do it ourselves, which is good. I was pretty poor, but it was good. And so I said, I never intended to work for somebody for the rest of my life, David, but I'll give you another couple of years, and then I'll probably either go to South America or maybe I'll go north, because that's what I thought Australia was going to be about. Bull buggies and red dust. I went to Esperance, and the cattle are standing on top of each other, 5 acres to the cow. Woo. But I said, but I know this is your baby, but if you guys are willing to let me buy in, I'll stay here till I'm dead. So He said, all right. So he went home, and a couple of days later, after speaking with Nicole, he said, well, we want you to buy a third of the business. So I think in 2005, I bought a third of the business, and we've gone from 3 vets to 13 vets, and I travel all over Australia and meet amazing people. We're all the same. It must have been a culture shock moving to Australia. So, well, farmers and ranchers are the same, or stockmen. They're the same no matter where you go.
You've found that, have you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're all in it for the same reason. They want to protect their asset and the planet in the process, and they want to pass it on to their offspring, and they want to look after the livestock that they're looking after. And so it's a pretty simple job, really. I don't work for a living, Prue.
So your specialty, perhaps, is BDVD.
Oh, well, that's kind of one of my little hobby horses. Yeah. So when I had my own business in the U.S., which was wildly successful, obviously, because I left to move here, an opportunity came up to do a food animal medicine internship at Colorado State University, where I'd gone to uni. My roommate, when I was going through vet school, had gone back to do some postdoctorate work and had accepted an internship. And one of the interns with him had a family emergency, incidentally, from Australia. So she'd left, and Danny rang me and said, hey, Enoch, you want to do a food animal medicine internship? And I was like, oh, hell, sure. So I did an internship, and the project that I worked on was measuring the efficacy of a BVD vaccine to prevent intrauterine production of PIs. So I was pretty across BVD. And so then when I moved here and I started finding it, no one seemed to know anything about the disease. When I talked to producers, they had no idea what I was talking about. Maybe it was my accent, who knows? But I went hunting some vaccine after having dealt with a case at a farm. And I was told there were no vaccines for BVD in Australia, which was remarkable because there was 160 licensed vaccines for BVD in the US when I'd left. And I mean, everybody vaccinates over there. So I started calling folks that I'd worked on a vaccine trial in the US, and they said, well, there is potentially a CSL vaccine for BVD called Pestigard. So I rang CSL, and they said, oh, we sold over to Zoetis or Pfizer. So I rang Pfizer, and they said, oh, yeah, we've got that, but no one was really buying it. And I said, well, send me some packs. And then in discussions with them, I ended up doing a serological survey throughout the district just to see how much was around and to help people become aware of the disease. And then Pfizer rang me again to see if I wanted to do a trial. And the vaccine was originally a feedlot vaccine developed through the precursor to MLA, Cattle Research Compensation Fund, through the DAN 49 study. And it had been built to prevent BRD in the feedlot. And so they rang me and said, hey, we got this vaccine. It's going to expire. Do you want to do some trial work? And I was like, heck yeah, that sounds awesome. They said, well, tell us about your feedlot. And I said, no, I want to try to prevent reproductive loss. And they said, oh, but it's a feedlot vaccine. I said, yeah, but it's also a really important reproductive disease. So I did a vaccine trial, and we just hit the money in one mob. It was about 1,000 heifers. We did it on 8 properties, and 6 out of 8 had a good response to vaccination, improved conception rates. But on one particular property, we improved conception rates by 20.5%. It was huge. And what it was they're individually mated groups of heifers, and then they had boxed them after single sire mating. And some of those groups had PIs in them, the carriers for BVD. And apparently, ostensibly, a bunch of them were naive. And so it caused huge issues. So it's 20% improvement in pregnancy rate. So that got me kind of rolling. And then I'd done some validation work on the ear notch in the US, which it was really kind of a cornerstone of control in Europe. And so I was trying to get the departments over here to do ear notch testing to look for PIs, because blood samples have maternal antibody interference. So if you're testing a calf to see if it's a carrier for BVD, because the key to controlling is finding and identifying and removing PIs, and then trying to provide immunity to at-risk females. So an opportunity came up through the Australian Cattle Vets. It's called the Cooper's Rural Practice Scholarship. I'm an inveterate procrastinator, Prue, and Swanee had said to me, "Hey, there's this scholarship. You got to be out of school less than 5 years." So the night it was due, I sat down and hammered out a proposal to develop a voluntary eradication scheme for BVD, and I mailed it off. And about a week or two later, I got an email back and said, "Thank you for your application, but you forgot to fill out some of the paperwork." And I thought, "Ooh, geez, hope that doesn't bite me in the bum." So I finished it up, sent it in, and blow me down, I won. So I used that money to go to a BVD eradication meeting that was happening in Denver, Colorado. It's called BVD Eradication, The Time Is Now. And so Paul Val from Norway spoke about their experiences in Scandinavia eradicating BVD. And they had a whole bunch of other speakers from all over the world. And I went there, and most of the guys were European researcher types, and they were kind of white coat sorts of guys. And I wore a suit, and I reached out to them to say I wanted to come to it. And they said, "Well, why don't you send us an abstract?" So I sent them an abstract, and blow me down, they let me speak, Prue, which was wild. So anyway, I went to my brother's house. I borrowed everything except my underwear, borrowed a suit, borrowed the socks, got up there, and I got up on the stage, and it was BVD, the Australian perspective. And I said, "How you going, mates?" I said, "Nah, just kidding you. I'm from Wild Horse. I'm from Eastern Colorado." And I talked about what I was doing over here with that serological survey and the vaccine trial. And then the break happened. And I didn't know anybody, but I saw this guy wearing a ball cap like myself, and it had some feedlot vaccine on it or something. So I shifted my gear and parked it where he was sitting. And when he sat back down, he said, "I really liked your talk." I said, "Oh, thank you, man." He goes, "Bill Hessman, I think you'll enjoy my talk." And he did this amazing, groundbreaking research. He got roped into it, and he developed a business out of it, where they ear-notched every animal going into the feedlot at entry on a 22,000 head brand new feedlot. And they categorized the pens as either having a PI in them, next to a pen with a PI, or not having any exposure at all, in a nutshell. And when they crunched the data, the pens that were exposed to PIs were behind at closeout, by the time that all the pennies had been counted, by $67.49 per fed animal. So the entire pen. So essentially each PI was costing around 10 grand to that feedlot's bottom line. And so he started a business for that particular client, and then it grew in the U.S. to a lot of feedlots, ear-notching calves before they get to the feedlot, because it doesn't pay to try to feed them. One, they don't do well. They generally die. But secondarily, they affect the performance within that feedlot. So later on, I duplicated that with Tony Batterham at Killara, and we showed a 2.2, so over double the incidence of BRD in pens that had exposure to BVD. So anyway, in a nutshell, I was telling him all this stuff, and I was pretty excited. And before his talk, and he said, "You're going to like my talk." And then when he came and sat down, he said, I'm going to help you. And so he sent over a purpose-built, like all the gear, a duplication of the lab he had in his little lab in Sublette, Kansas, which was a town of 50 people. And he consults to about 3 or 4 million head of cattle around him. So I started a lab in the spare bedroom of my house in Esperance, and was doing it for my own clients, and a couple vets heard about it. And well, we've got a couple hundred vets that send us ear notches, and we've tested 700,000 animals from all around Australia. I've given a couple hundred talks on pesty. I ended up on the cattle vets, and that's where the story gets fun, I think, Prue, because I was talking to Ann Cover years later. We're having a couple wines after an exec meeting, and I said, "Dan, I just wanted to tell you that rural practice scholarship changed my life." And she goes, "Oh yes, Enoch, you've done a lot of good things." She's very kind, very nice of her. And I said, I've always wondered, Ann, that when I applied for that scholarship, how many other applicants were there? She goes, "Oh, Enoch, was a great application." I said, "Yeah, but how many other applicants?" She goes, "Enoch, if anyone else would have applied, you probably still would have won." Oh, and so I tell that to kids when I'm traveling around with students. I do a lot of stuff with the universities, and kids come and spend time with us in a car, and they're kind of captive audience. And I tell them that story because there's so many opportunities for young people, especially if they're enthusiastic and honest. Man, the world's their oyster, but they're afraid to put themselves out there sometimes. They're afraid of rejection, and we're all batting for them.
And you've got to be in it to win it. And
got to be in it to win
if you
it.
hadn't have put your hand up for it, then
I would have been a successful vet in Esperance, but geez, what it's done for our business, what it's done for my profile and the lovely people I've met, it was amazing, Prue.
Yeah, sliding door moment, they say that is, don't they?
Yeah. Same as coming here. Like I said, I had my own vet business in the U.S., which was wildly successful, and I just happened to be walking down the hallway, and I walked past the lunchroom, and a friend of mine was sitting there. he was studying for the NAVLE, which is the big exam in the U.S. to get national boards. And I passed him, and then I came back and said, "Hey, how you going?" He goes, "Yeah, good." I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, studying." I said, "Oh, man, don't stress. It's a tough test, but everybody passes. You'll be fine." And he just randomly said, "Did you know if you pass the NAVLE, you can work in Australia?" And I went, "I'll be go to hell." And that's how I ended up here. That was a real sliding door moment, like random. I had no intention. It hadn't even ever occurred to me that I could come here. And then after that, I was like, by God, I think I'll do it. Let's try it. And yeah, it's a crazy world.
Crazy world, yeah. In the conversation that we had earlier, you talked about the principles, your guiding principles.
Yeah.
What are they?
I try to make my producers more profitable without sacrificing welfare outcomes. So I'm looking after the animals, and by looking after the animals, I'm looking after the producer. I just really value what producers do for all of us, producing good quality, nutritious food, but also in that I think livestock, there's a slow groundswell of a realization of this, but cattle and sheep and other ruminants actually protect a lot of habitat and preserve, incidentally or accidentally, also conserve habitat for wildlife as well. And that means a lot to me. I think we play an important role in the planet. The planet had a lot of transient herbivores before we supplanted them with the livestock we've got now, but they fulfill a similar role in the ecosystem.
Changing tack here, where do you think the role of cattle vets is now compared to when you first started? And do you feel it's being usurped, if you like, by more lay people?
I think historically, like if you look back in the early days, especially in West Australia where I live now, there are research centers that were run by the department. And a lot of the research, both for broadacre agriculture and livestock research, was conducted by government entities. And so a lot of those entities of the government veterinarian, their role diminished. And I think prior to that, veterinarians were kind of encouraged in practice to be more of a fire engine vet. Phone rings, pick up the phone, deliver the calf, go do some preg testing. But I think our role is changing significantly, and AI and things like that's going to change it even more, where I think now we need to be more of a consultant. Like I try to listen to everything my cow cockies tell me so that I can tell the next cow cocky what I learned from the other cow cockies. And it's a cumulative and collaborative affair of, I guess, trying to innovate with them and help them to share their knowledge through us as a conduit and grow. And so I think our role as consultants is increasing. Now, simultaneously to that, as demand increases for our services, as people recognize that the roles that veterinarians play on farm generate a return on investment, as our population of veterinarians grows, there's a shortfall at times. And so that's where you see lay people popping up here and there, supplanting some of our roles. So whether that be preg testing or AI or even spaying is done, a lot's done by lay people. I think they have their role. I think when they work in conjunction with veterinarians, with veterinary oversight, it's probably better. But primarily, I feel that the threats for our industry are zoonotic and exotic disease, poor welfare outcomes, and our ability to export the product we produce, whether it be live or whether it be fresh or frozen. And backing all that up is having on-the-ground surveillance by people that are educated in animal husbandry at a veterinary level. So I feel that whilst lay people do a great job at some technical aspects, I think producers, it would benefit their enterprise to engage a vet as often as they can for those roles, because passive surveillance, it doesn't cost them anything. You know, we're there, again, at the crush, giving them advice. Like in my business, for every dollar I earn pregging, I'm earning another $8 or $9, bull testing, AI, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those, everything I do, and I work very hard to make sure that, in my opinion, this happens, every dollar producer spends with me, they're earning more back. So I'm an investment. I'm not an expense. And I think if all I did was preg test, it'd be like if you're in a small town and you had a good mechanic, heck of a guy, he could rebuild a motor, absolute genius, can pull it apart. And then someone comes through town offering half the price for an oil change service. And everyone in the district gets their oil changed with Cletus the oil changer. And he is fast, he's awesome, he's good. But then one day you dump the clutch and your ute doesn't go anywhere, and you go, oh, my clutch is burned up. So you go around to the old mate's place to have him work on your ute, and he's gone. You say, what the hell happened? He said, well, I couldn't make a living anymore. None of you guys were getting your oil changed with me. So preg testing is kind of the key to the castle. And so I'm very defensive a bit about the role of veterinarians in pregnancy diagnosis. Yeah, it's not a difficult job. It's a skill job based on experience. I can teach people how to preg test, but I can't teach people to learn what I've learned in vet school without putting them through a veterinary education, in my opinion. I think the whole system is geared around supporting livestock. And if we're removed from that conversation, I don't think the producers realize what they're missing out on. And I know what we miss out on is the viability of a practice. If you're not doing those core veterinary procedures, you end up just becoming a small animal vet. And that's not what we need in the event of an incursion of a zoonotic or exotic disease. We need early recognition and quick response with relevant personnel. And all those things will be improved by keeping vets on farm.
How do you communicate to the wider population the value of vets in that situation in particular?
Well, it's difficult when you're a veterinarian yourself, because I think if someone doesn't agree with my sentiment and they hear me saying it, they just assume that I'm just looking after my own interests. What I try to reinforce to those guys is the reason I am a vet is because of them. I could have done something different, but I became a vet because I love producers and I love livestock. So in my role when I was president, I spent quite a bit of time at Canberra and going and speaking to peak industry bodies and trying to encourage those guys to become our advocates. For instance, ALEC, the Live Export Corporation, there was a push to deregulate pregnancy diagnosis in Queensland. And in the NT, it was already deregulated. And the exporters had come to me individually because I was president and said, Enoch, you got to do something. Don't let this happen in Queensland. I said, well, what is it you guys want? They said, well, we don't want deregulation because what's happening is we've got people with credibility comes accountability. And as vets, yes, we've got credibility, but we also have accountability. If we can't do the job properly, we can lose our accreditation within the PregCheck scheme. So because it was relatively unregulated in the NT, they were getting pretty bad outcomes, which amounted to about 5% pregnancies in animals that were supposed to be empty. Now, that wasn't an issue until we had SGAS, where they were no longer allowed to exit the supply chain when they got to Indonesia. Previously, they said, she's pregnant. They sell it to somebody, they go home and calve it. But because of the supply chain assurance scheme, they had to stay in the feedlot with a calf at foot. And so the importers, they're starting to arc up about it. So then the exporters, of course, are getting a gut ache because they've got to pay for these animals. And they're like, please, please don't let Queensland turn into the NT. So I said to them, can you please be our advocate? Go on to Beef Central? They said, no, we can't. You know what I mean? It's so difficult. And this sort of things like this are good, Prue, is I think people understand that where we're coming from. We're not trying to conquer the world and preg test every cow and trying to feather our pockets, as we're accused. We've been trained to value our own role, but sadly, when we communicate it to people, it's perceived as self-interest. And that bums me out. So I need you to tell the story, Prue. You tell them. You tell them that we're good guys.
I'm telling the story, but you are too. You actually have a YouTube channel.
Hilariously enough, I'd been pushed by the Murdoch vet students. We get students from all over Australia come spend time with us, and oftentimes we see some pretty neat stuff. But they might have had a friend that saw something and say, "Oh, geez, Enoch, you need a YouTube channel." There's a guy named Cody Creelman out of Canada, and they kept saying, "Oh, you like Cody? You'd be really good." And then my son, who wants to be an influencer when he grows up, was like, "Dad," and he's like 9. "Dad, set me up a YouTube channel." So I was like, you know how it is with your kids. Like, on the weekend, son, we'll get there. And then the weekend comes, Dad, we got to set up this YouTube channel. So finally, because I'm not actually a very social media-y kind of guy, but I was like, all right, Eli, I'll set you up a YouTube channel. So I started to set it up, but there's so many restrictions on being underage. So then I was like, oh, heck, the students have been pushing me. So I started Enoch the Cow Vet, put up a video, and it went viral. So it's mad. So I've got about 176,000 subscribers and people from all over the world. And they say the nicest things. Occasionally I get a little bit of hate mail.
Do you?
Occasionally. But if they take umbrage at something I've done respectfully, then I address it. And they're often very, very good. Some people you can tell are just itching for a fight. But what the YouTube channel is about sharing stuff with other vets and young veterinarians. But it's also about the wider community that I think over time, like we're very close to the land in our families, but so many people, it might be 3, maybe even 4 generations from the land, and they've been left in isolation because we're over here working pretty hard. But we've left them in a bit of an echo chamber of their own design where they develop some pretty crazy rhetoric that just kind of circles around back on itself and becomes believable because they've heard what they've said from someone else. I feel that we need to be more proactive in telling our story. I give a talk called Proud to Produce Protein, the Ethics of Producing Beef. And it's really based on my experiences coming from a town of nobody, going up to uni and meeting vegetarians and going, what do you mean? You don't eat meat because you love animals? Well, I eat meat because I do love them. I'm giving her mom a home. I'm part of the cycle. Wild animals, the surplus animals, they don't die well. They die from starvation, predation, et cetera, et cetera. Domesticated animals that we look after and love, it's the same story, one in, one out. Every female is replaced by another female. The surplus animals are humanely euthanized. They're hungry, we feed them. They're thirsty, we give them something to drink. And luckily, when they're sick, they call me and I medicate them. If I get reincarnated, I want to come back as a cow. The subtitle for my Proud to Produce Protein is Things I Say to Vegans on Planes. Because I'm sitting next to somebody and they go, what do you do? I'm a veterinarian. Oh, I love animals. And I go, me too. And if they are vegan, of course, you know how it goes. They immediately tell you. And then I jokingly say to them, oh, I really struggle to eat wheat. And they go, excuse me? I say, yeah, wheat is murder. They go, what? I say, well, monoculture by definition excludes biodiversity. They go, what are you talking about? I say, well, I was lucky enough to be a field herpetologist for a number of years, traveling around eastern Colorado, looking at reptiles and amphibians as indicators of environmental health. And what I found is in the ranch country where cattle and sheep were still roaming, the ecosystem was intact because they played a similar role to the bison. And here in Australia, it's the same. As the wheat field there's only one thing growing out there, and that's wheat and nothing else. And we need wheat, fair enough. But even in Australia, that wheat field, most of the year, it's barren. There's nothing there. And so the refugia, the remaining remnant veg that's there, it can't sustain any life. But if there's a paddock of regenerative ag, multi-species crop with a few cows and sheep running around out there, those kangaroos and emus, when they pop out of that remnant veg, they got something to eat. And then they go back in there and raise babies. It's a good thing. And so I think we need to be more proactive, both as producers and as veterinarians, of telling our story. Because as I say to the vegan next to me, I love animals too. I think where we make a mistake sometimes is we get offended by them or when they attempt to offend us, much like my YouTube channel. But the reason they're doing it is because they're coming from a place of love of animals. So do we. And it's just helping them to empathize with our view and having a bit of empathy for their view too. My goal is by the time the lady comes by with the cart and they say, do you want the vegetarian surprise or do you want the steak? They go, by golly, I think I might have a steak.
So if we were to wrap all this up, if you were to look back on that boy in Wild Horse, Colorado, what would you tell him about this industry that you have ended up spending a good chunk of your life in?
What I say to kids that come and spend time with them and they say, what makes a good vet? I say to them, well, I want to hire someone who's honest and enthusiastic and kind. I can make a nice person skilled, but I can't make a skilled person nice. The other thing that Swanee, who hired me, said is that fear is the biggest impediment to growth. And I guess what I've learned is always have a go. Because even if you do trip or fall, you learn a lot in the process. And I say that to students sometimes when they say, oh, I don't know that, and they're a bit embarrassed. I say, every time you don't know something, you need to get excited because that is something that now you do know. You didn't know it before. You've discovered a chink in your armor, and now you can patch up that hole. And so that's life. I guess that'd be my advice, is to learn everything you can and remain optimistic and overall, look after everyone as though you would wish to be looked after, just like Jesus said. Have a go. That's a good Australianism. Yeah, that's it. Have a crack.
Have a crack. Have a crack. And you have.
I have, and it's been great. And just so many people have helped me, give me the opportunity, and I try to do the same.
Thanks, Enoch.
Thank you.
This has been So I Heard, a podcast commissioned by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. Background briefings by Ian McDonald. Editing and post-production by Drew Radford at Pod Talk. Music by Stuart Day. I'm Prue Adams. Thanks for listening.